Hello, my name is David Takitaki, and I am here today to present the case against Donald John Trump. Now, I am making this video knowing that my audience is going to consist of three different groups of people. The first is people who already have much of the same information that I do, who probably largely agree with me and are watching this because they want to feel validated in that knowledge and that belief. For you, welcome. Enjoy the ride. The other two groups of people who I am hoping will give this video some time are those of you who don't really know anything about what's going on and are maybe only just paying attention to this because you've seen it on the news 1,000 times or because the election's coming up in just 10 days. And you're curious. But the last audience may be the most important. And the last audience I am speaking to as conservatives. And the reason I want to speak to you through this medium is that I've had a lot of encounters in the last several days with people whom, from the conservative side, give me hope. They are people who are largely patriotic, decent, not bigoted folks, who are concerned about the way the country is currently sitting. They're made uncomfortable, perhaps, by some of the changes they have seen. They're feeling the pinch of inflation at the grocery store and the cost of housing, or maybe the cost of vehicles. And they are genuinely convinced that Donald Trump provides for them an avenue to both social stability and economic renewal. And I want to speak to them perhaps most of all. And I understand that it is perhaps unlikely that many of them will give me the time of day as we proceed. But I think it's worth the effort, because I don't believe that the vast majority of folks who are currently thinking or inclined to support Donald Trump in the upcoming election understand him the way that we understand him. And I think that by treating you with respect and decency and not yelling at you or accusing you of some great and grievous sin because of who you're leaning towards politically, we can at least have a conversation. And I can explain to you why, given the information that I possess, I don't share your political inclinations. So do understand, this is a sincere and good faith effort to give you the same framework and the same information by which I am approaching this election. Also note that I am a political scientist by trade. I'm an educator. And that while I am confident in the accuracy of the information that I am going to be sharing with you through this video, it is a summation of my observations, and it's specifically my opinion. I do not speak for any institution or group or professional bunch that I am associated with at all. This is me, and it's coming from me. But I will put the weight of my experience and expertise behind what I am going to share with you. So, functionally, let's begin. I believe that many of you have a perception that those perhaps in the mainstream media and on the left are irrationally upset with Donald Trump, that his conduct and his demeanor, his tone of voice, the words he uses, his mean tweets, have riled people up to the point where they cannot see him clearly. And I will credit the fact that that may be true in some cases. I, however, have reviewed much of the evidence of both his political positioning, his career, and the policies put forward by his administration in office, And I don't believe that most of the animus against Donald Trump is based simply on the fact that he is crass or vulgar or occasionally, a braggatorial. What I do believe is that filters, both selective filters that we choose where to get our information, selections in terms of media outlets, an absence of high-quality information presented in the mainstream, and willful and deliberate misinformation have created a situation in which you and I perhaps live in alternate versions of reality, where what we think about the world and what we think about what's happening are not connected. And so, maybe it's the educator in me, but I think that I owe it at least to the world and to you to give you a glimpse into where I, and probably a larger we, are coming from when we have serious misgivings about who Donald Trump is and what he stands for. I will provide links and resources at the end of this video to all of the information and the claims that I am bringing forward here, so that you are free to check it on your own. I am concerned, of course, that our differing opinions about what perhaps quality media is or accurate information is may cause us a problem regardless, but that's not going to stop me from making this effort. So, let's start with the idea of economics, because I have heard that inflation is perhaps the most pressing issue in terms of your kitchen table American political issues in the 2024 election. Make no mistake, U.S. inflation is up, and it has been up for the last several years. Realistically, U.S. inflation in 2021 was about 3.55%. In 2022, we saw record inflation at 6.15%. 2023, 4.8%. We've seen it come down here into 2024, and year-end projections say we're going to be out at about 3.6%. That is making things like groceries more expensive. That is making things like vehicles and housing and raw materials more expensive. And it means that our paychecks are not going as far as they used to. That is a problem, and one that we need to address as a country and as an economy. What is important to note about that inflationary cycle, though, is that it does not come simply because one president or another is in charge. Inflation is multi-causal. It comes from things like the dramatic loss of human capital that we saw after the COVID pandemic. It comes from significant shortages overseas. It comes from increases in transportation costs. It comes from competition, as countries around the world are themselves using more resources than they had previously because they've advanced along the ladder of development. For quite some time, the United States of America, despite being only 5% of the world population, consumed close to 40% of its resources. And that type of consumption, that kind of plenty, especially because we enjoyed it after, in many ways, World War II, when the rest of the world's industrial capacity had been diminished and ours was functionally untouched, is unsustainable. The world is changing, and COVID played a huge factor in it. And there's a lot of other factors that impact inflation. What's important, I think, for us to understand is that global inflation, which increasingly impacts all of the goods and services that we consume here in the United States because of imports, because of outsourcing of materials, sometimes because of outsourcing of jobs when corporations realize they can, make things cheaper by paying people in other countries a living wage that's much lower than our living wage here. All of these factors impact global inflation as well. And if we want to take a look at where we are compared to what's happening in the world, global inflation is regularly close to 2 points higher than the inflation we see here in the United States. And that is functionally because our economic policies are good ones. Our economy has been managed well. In fact, if you read The Economist the other day, you will see that we are functionally the envy of the world. American productivity, energy production, our price of stocks, yes, but the value of our currency is the, as they say, the envy of the world. Our economic power at this point in time is fantastic. We have done a better recovery in this country than nearly any other country in the world post-COVID. Our job numbers are phenomenal at this point in time, regularly seeing 4-point unemployment. And while that has not, because of inflation, translated to the kind of vast prosperity we would love to see, our economy is firing on all cylinders. And so if we're going to look at inflation, we have to look at inflation in context. If our economy were not as well managed as it is, we would not be doing as well as we are compared to the rest of the world. And that's why I think it's important to look at the attack lines coming from the Trump campaign about inflation in their proper context. Yes, Americans are hurting. But is Donald Trump really the guy who can fix that? Is he really the guy who will change that for you? Well, let's take a look at what he did during his first term. Now, if you look at the reports from the Joint Economic Committee from Congress, you'll see that Donald Trump inherited a robust economy from President Obama. Now, yes, it's a Democrat going to a Republican, but if you look at all of the metrics that happened in that transition between 2016 and 2017, you can see that the economy was, in fact, strong. And much of the economic progress that we see during the Trump administration happens between that January 2017 date when he took office and, realistically, the end of 2018. And it's not until January of 2018 that his main economic plan, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, really goes into effect. Now, that is a $1.9 trillion tax cut, has not panned out in the way that he hoped it would. He said that it would pay for itself. Well, no. In fact, if you look at the data between then and now, you'll see that collections in terms of corporate taxes have remained flat despite record profits. Analysis shows that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was supposed to create wealth for the economy and create revenue for the government, is only paying the American people about 15 cents worth of revenue from tax collections for every $1 that was cut by the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That number was supposed to be over $1. We were supposed to be getting more back through corporate productivity. And yes, COVID plays a part in that, but it's also a metric by which this measure does not appear to be paying for itself, nor does it look like it will. Why is that? Well, if we take a look at how corporations were supposed to use this windfall that they got, we thought that they would use it to benefit workers. Well, did they? The short answer is no. Executives and high-paying workers received benefits, but even amongst those benefits, about 80% of them went to executives and to shareholders, and about 20% went to high-wage earners. Low-wage earners on this scale, or middle-class Americans, received almost no benefits at all. So we didn't see the economic boost there that was promised through this significant cut to taxes and federal revenue. Okay, well, what else was it supposed to do? It was supposed to boost investment, right? Corporations would turn around and take this extra money and they would put it into the economy, or shareholders would do the same. Did investment go up? No. In the time between the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act took effect in January of 2018 and the COVID pandemic, investment actually tracked down. And then, of course, COVID hit and everything tracked way down. So it did not deliver the promised investment. Okay, it was supposed to onshore funds, right? Under this new, more generous tax scheme to corporations and high earners, people would take money that had been offshored and they would bring it back onshore. President Trump said somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 trillion worth of this wealth that was kept outside of the United States and therefore away from any kind of American taxation or revenue generation for taxpayers would come back to the United States. So, since 2018, how much revenue has come back? Well, he said 4 to 5 trillion. As it turns out, it's 17 to 30 billion with a B. So you're talking less than 1% of what was promised in terms of onshoring wealth. How did businesses use the money? they gave it to shareholders. They paid out dividends. They did stock buybacks, right? And given the fact that these are the kind of programs that have been promised again by the Trump administration for the core of its potential economic policy moving forward, it's difficult to say that these things will do anything to curb the inflation that is already functionally being curbed compared to what's going on in the rest of the world. So, if you're interested in the economy, it's very difficult to say that Donald Trump's plans are going to do better for us. In fact, most of the promises he made with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act have not come true. That's a problem when somebody can't, in fact, honor the promises they made. And when someone is continuously referring to the American economy today as some kind of train wreck, when pretty much all objective analysis suggests that the American economy is not only the best in the world, it's the envy of the world. Now, no one party can take full credit for that leadership. Business and entrepreneurialism have a lot to do with how we got to where we are. But this has been the stewardship of the Biden-Harris administration that's gotten us this far. So, consider for a moment why, if someone is out there promising something they did not deliver and could not deliver during their first term, it is difficult for an objective analysis to say they're going to deliver it in their second. And that's not yet factoring in the fact that Trump seems to be promising significant more tax relief for corporations and for the wealthy, which will lower government revenues and make it more difficult for the government to provide vital services. And that's just on the economy. If the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did not succeed in doing what it was supposed to do, it really does bring into question elements of competence. And if we're going to talk about the Trump administration and competence, we have to talk about the COVID-19 response. It's not only fundamental to where the economy is at today, but it's an excellent measuring stick in a neutral and objective frame for what kind of leadership Donald Trump provided during his first term in office. So, Trump is quoted as saying that nobody knew there'd be a pandemic or an epidemic of this proportion, that no one had ever seen anything like this before, and no one could have known a thing like this could happen. The problem is, that's not accurate. Not only did the National Health Service and many different elements within the government have pre-existing pandemic playbooks, but Trump, in his capacity as president, was regularly briefed on core and crucial threats to the United States, epidemics and pandemics being amongst them. Trump was caught off guard by COVID, partially because he had ignored those pandemic playbooks, and partially because, as has been the repeated testimony of individuals surrounding him, he regularly could not be bothered to get into the nuance and detail of technical briefings. It wasn't what he chose to spend his time on, which, if you are the CEO of a corporation who is employing experts at lower levels who can provide you with basic synopses and you can simply provide overall guidance and strategy, might work. Maybe that worked for Trump in his business life. But a president is not a CEO. The power dynamic is different. The element of service is different. You're not accountable to shareholders. You're accountable to voters. You're accountable to public health, and you're accountable to posterity as the president. And maybe that helps explain why some of Trump's actions actively undermined our preparedness even before the pandemic hit. Trump disbanded the pandemic response team and incorporated that specialized group into other existing agencies. Now, he did not fire everyone on it, as some have claimed, but most of the people who have analyzed the response to COVID say that that transition potentially was damaging to our response efforts. And there was no particularly good reason to do it. But once the pandemic actually hit, once we were actually faced with this massive threat to human life, Donald Trump's actions are very revealing of his competence for leadership because he lied about it. He lied about it to the American people. He lied about it for his own political benefit. He censored scientific reports from U.S. agencies. He ignored expert advice. He politicized testing. He provided vital testing equipment to Vladimir Putin in the early days of the pandemic. He undercut health experts on the importance of masking. He promoted dangerous and ineffective treatments. His actions cost American lives. And that is a hard claim to make, but it's one that has to be taken seriously. Take, for example, Canada. Canada had almost the exact same 1.1% case fatality rate for COVID that we had here in the United States. So if you got COVID in either the US or Canada, it was about a 1.1% chance it would kill you. Now, that's hard enough to deal with. But Canada only saw 135 people per 100,000 die. 135 people per 100,000 died. Unfortunately, the United States saw 341 people per 100,000 within our population die. Now, what do those numbers mean? That means that the medical treatment for COVID in both countries was just as good. If you actually got it, it's approximately the same chance that you would suffer death as a result of catching COVID during the pandemic. But the United States saw something like 1 in 3 individuals contract COVID, where in Canada, it was only about 1 in 10. That is a massive failure of public health in this country. What it means is, functionally, if our pandemic response had been approximately the same as our neighbors to the north, about 791,000 Americans would be alive today who instead died because of COVID. And if you have an executive who is actively hampering scientific efforts, who's undercutting health experts on the issue of masking, who is politicizing testing, who is using the framework of the pandemic as an attack line on China, instead of rallying the United States of America around the best public health practices that literally saved lives just over the border in our neighbors to the north, then that is a fundamental failure of leadership. And the price is 791,000 American lives. If you are trying to evaluate a leader based on competence, that kind of failure is nearly inexcusable. It really is inexcusable. So why would someone who has been given the power from the American people to serve them spend so much of this unique health crisis actively undermining our efforts to combat it? Well, the short answer is political efficacy. The long answer is we have to take a good look at the values that this person has. When you can place your own political fortunes over the health and lives of other people, when you are willing to lie. Let's just talk about being willing to lie for a minute. We'll get back to this in just a second, but most of us were raised by people who taught us that lying is wrong. That's not something you do. Right now, you tell your kids about the tooth fairy or Santa Claus because it gives them some kind of Christmas magic. That's, at best a little white lie or one done benevolently, right? You might find yourself in a situation where somebody goes, hey, how do I look today? And maybe they don't look awesome, but you kind of boost them up a little bit. Oh, you look nice. I can accept someone who tells those kind of lies. I have an arrangement with my wife that I'm completely allowed to lie to her if I am setting up some kind of fun surprise for her down the road. And I will do that all the time, and I will do it with a smile on my face, right? But that's not lying about a global pandemic. What kind of person does that, right? What are their values? So many of us place a lot of value on family, right? And I want to, give the guy some credit. Trump appears to have solid relationships with his children. His wives, not so much, right? He married his first wife, Ivana, and he cheated on her multiple times. As a married man, that's a very conscious decision, right? You don't accidentally cheat on your wife. It doesn't just happen, right? You make that choice. And when you make it more than once, I think it says a lot about you as a human being. Now, he married the woman he cheated on Ivana with, Marla Maples. He then cheated on her. And not only did he cheat on her, but he bragged about his exploits to a reporter from People magazine. And he's actually on tape doing so. Not only is he on tape doing so, he was pretending to be someone else when he did it. He was pretending to be a publicist in his own organization named John Miller. And so he's talking about himself in the third person, and he is spinning tales about how, benevolent and wonderful Trump is. Because it's really him talking about himself in the third person. That is also a deeply questionable kind of human being when it comes to their values and their integrity, right? And of course, we've known now from the results of his New York trials and everything else that not only did he cheat on Marla, but after he married Melania, he cheated on her several times with apparently adult actresses and who knows who else. I also can't move on from this particular sundry period in his history without mentioning the fact that he has been found guilty of slander and liable for sexual assault. The Jean Carroll case has resulted in significant fines and penalties for him. And his conduct, though at the time it did not, according to the legal definition, would currently meet the legal definition of rape in the state of New York. Again, sexually assaulting anyone, sexually assaulting a woman, is not something that happens by accident. It is a choice. In fact, it's a series of choices that you make once per second during the entire period of time. And at any point in time, you can stop. And if you don't, and you do it again, and then you brag about how they just let you do it when you're a celebrity to someone on an Access Hollywood set, that suggests to me that you don't care about what the other person in that situation feels. That you are putting your fun, your satisfaction, your physical gratification ahead of any concern about them, to the point where, despite them feeling violated and abused, you're happy to brag about it because in some weird, warped circle, being able to sexually assault people without consequence might make you look good in front of somebody else. It's a sign of your celebrity or stardom. Those kind of values are not compatible with, I think, most of the values that you or I, or many of us out here, have been raised with. And that's not just, those of us who are religious or Democrat or Republican. I mean, American values. Rape's not cool. Sexual assault's not okay. All of us would probably be ashamed to have something like that in our own personal history. So, I cannot speak to the sincerity of Trump's religious faith, His behavior certainly does not necessarily suggest he leads a Christian life. I will mention on the subject, however, that selling Bibles with your name on them I am uncomfortable with that as being representative of faithful, generous, pious faith of really any denomination or any religion. And the actual selling of goods as a presidential candidate is functionally problematic. Now, as a business person, you can sell whatever you want within the structures of the law, and it's okay to do so, right? But as a candidate, selling goods to the public is potentially a mechanism by which you can circumvent many of our campaign funding and finance rules. If someone in a foreign country wants to buy 1,000 pairs of your $400 sneakers or 100 of your $100,000 watches, that is millions of dollars coming from a foreign actor that are put into the pocket of someone who is actively seeking office in the United States. And since there's no prohibition on you using your own funds to run for office, those can functionally be the same as any kind of campaign donation. And in an age in which everyday voters already feel like big money in politics robs them of their voice by handing it to lobbyists and corporations and whoever can buy the most TV ads, this is ethically problematic. It's a question of whether or not you believe in the fairness of the system. And when you're out selling $100,000 watches that no one's ever seen before and may or may not actually exist, your honor comes into question. Now, honor can be kind of a fuzzy concept, but I know what honor isn't, right? Honor isn't having an entire history through which you don't pay people who work for you. There is a whole litany of litigation where Donald Trump will hire contractors. Frequently they were workers who worked on his buildings, who built things for him, and he would simply refuse to pay them. Why? Because his active legal team could then defend him against any kind of lawsuit, and faced with the prospect of having to go against high-powered professional lawyers in New York City, many of those people would settle for pennies on the dollar that they were owed. And it was cheaper for Trump to pay his lawyers than to pay his bills. Now, there is an unfortunate math that says maybe that's good economics, right? If I can pay my 3 high-priced lawyers their retainer and therefore not have to pay all of these other bills, at the end of the day, maybe that on the balance sheet looks like I am saving money. But at what cost? And what does it say about the kind of person who would do that? I don't think that's honorable, right? And if we look back at his New York history, we also have to ask ourselves, is an honorable person the kind of person who engages in racism, who engages in bigotry? And the answer is no. Now, there are legal cases on the books against Donald Trump and his father about discrimination in housing practices. I'm not going to read them to you, but you can find them for yourself, and you will see that, yes, their housing empire was engaging in racist practices. You can take a look at some of the comments that he has made, both as a private citizen. You can take a look at the ad and the tone and the language he put out about the Central Park Five. You can take a look at the way he has described immigrants as vermin. You can take a look at the way he suggested Haitian immigrants were eating pets, despite the fact that these were easily disproven lies. And you can come to your own decision as to whether or not people who are not racist say such things. Do you say such things? I said at the beginning I was working off the premise that people I'm talking to are not bigots, and I'm holding us to that, right? You and me. I've never said anything like that in my life. Never even suggested it. Have you? Who in your life may have suggested that? And what are their views on race? His behavior doesn't line up with somebody who is not a bigot. Lines right up with people who are. And why do you tell something like that that's so obviously disproven? So easily disproven? Well, it's a lie. And it serves you somehow, right? That's the thing about lies, is people tell them because it serves them somehow. Now, in his administration, fact checkers clocked in excess of 30,000 lies. And make no mistake, public officials, politicians, they will frequently get dinged by fact checkers for half-truths, for misrepresentations of the truth. That's common. That's something that happens on both sides. It's not something that's unique to either political party, right? And on top of that, politicians will be known to spin things. Media figures and celebrities can too, but to present something in the best possible light, or the best case scenario of an event or of a policy for their own interest, right? And sometimes that is a lie of omission, and sometimes it's a lie of exaggeration. But it's not the same as simply telling something that is completely false, right? If I see a color and I think, oh, that's a little bit more green, and you think it's a little bit more blue, and we have a discussion about that, that is not the same thing as somebody over there saying it is obviously polka dot yellow, right? That is a very, very different kind of statement about what is actually going on over here. The most unique thing about Trump was not only the volume of lies that he told during his administration and in the day since, but it was the gravity of those lies. He was not simply spinning things one way or another. He was creating alternate realities. Things that are easily and demonstrably not true. The man is a liar. And perhaps his biggest lie is the big lie. It's his contention that somehow, some way, he won the presidential election in 2020. That is false. It is demonstrably false. Our own CISA agency, which evaluated that election, found it to be the most secure in the history of the United States. Nowhere from Republican officials at the state level up and down the country was any kind of significant voter fraud found, and any of the voter fraud that was found was small cases, one or two people here or there, misfiled ballot, voted for using the ballot of a spouse or a loved one who had passed away. None of it, even if added all together, would have been outcome determinant in any state, much less in every state. And Donald Trump knew this. His advisors told him this. His experts told him this. White House counsel told him this. And he proceeded to lie about it anyway. He proceeds to lie about it to this day. And the consequences of those lies not only manifest in the faith degradation we see now in American democracy, the loss of confidence in elections that we see. But it also manifested in the January 6th insurrection. Make no mistake, January 6th was deliberate. It was deliberate because prior to January 6th, Donald Trump and his aides attempted through fostering and presenting slates of false electors in several states around the country to functionally overturn the legitimate result of the 2020 election. There are lawsuits and active prosecutions of many of his collaborators happening simultaneously in states around the country. And in many of those prosecutions, individuals who were part of those slates of electors or were part of the effort to create false electors to be used to cast doubt on the 2020 election and therefore potentially empower Vice President Mike Pence or maybe even Congress to hand power back to Donald Trump despite his loss. Many of the people involved in that have now functionally turned state's evidence. They've taken pleas. They are providing testimony. This happened. It was documented in the January 6th case. Yes, it's being documented in the prosecution and the charging documents provided by Special Counsel Jack Smith. They did this. And when it failed, when Mike Pence refused to use his power as the vice president and as the acting president of the Senate to help them in their conspiracy, when he correctly said, my job here is just to read the stuff and move on. I don't have the power to stop this like you want me to. When that remarkably conservative Republican looked in the face of conspiracy and a functional overthrow of the American government and said, no, I refuse, Donald Trump summoned people to the Capitol on January 6th, and he said it would be wild. He pointed them at the Capitol and said, you have to fight or you're going to lose this country. And they did. They violently entered the Capitol building. They disgraced the seat of American legislative power. They hammered down doors. They broke windows. They broke into offices. They viciously beat the brave and courageous members of the Capitol Police Department. And they did it in service of Trump. They said they did, and have said so in the trials that have happened to this day, where many of them have been prosecuted for those actions. Several Capitol Police officers died in the aftermath of that incident. Several more have retired from service and will never be the same again, because they took a solemn oath to protect the people of this country, and the people of this country tried to kill them in order to overthrow the will of the American people and install Donald Trump into a presidency he did not earn. That is not honorable. That is not honest. That is not good. And if you are the type of human who, by your values, can see fit to do those things, I don't think you share the values of most Americans. I don't think you share the value of all of the conservatives I have known over the course of my life, including my friends, my family, and realistically, at one point in time, myself. It's a deep violation. And that alone would be bad enough, right? I'm not going to actually get into the circumstances of his first impeachment, where he used the power of the presidency to try to effectively force a foreign ally to help him politically in exchange for vitally needed military aid, right? I mean, that's another thing that you just don't do. But maybe the most concerning element of this for us today, who are deeply opposed to Donald Trump, is what the future might hold. Now, there is a phenomenon by which Donald Trump will say something, and then people will go, I can't believe he just said that. And a whole bunch of people who otherwise are supporting him will run back out and go, well, that's not what he meant, right? That's not actually what he meant to say. What he meant to say is this other thing, which is much more reasonable and seems much more acceptable. The phenomenon's been referred to now as sane washing, right? Because you take what he says and you wash it so that it's sane. But there's been more than one occasion where people have gone back to him afterwards and been like, so you don't really mean that, do you? And then he doubles down on it and goes, yes, that's exactly what I said, and that's exactly what I meant. Take, for example, his comment about wanting to be a dictator, right? Be a dictator for a day or something like that. He made the comment, and it was so alarming to many people in the American media that at the next opportunity, Sean Hannity went back to Donald Trump on Fox News and said, now, people are blowing this out of proportion, right? You didn't really mean to say that, right? To which Donald Trump doubled down. No, I'll just be a dictator on day one. Think for a moment about the United States Constitution, the Pledge of Allegiance that we take, the document that our military people swear to, the long history of American struggle, the amount of blood our soldiers and heroes have spilled in order to keep this country free. And this guy says, I want to be a dictator. And if that were the only thing he said, that would be, alarming, right? But that's not the only thing he said. He's made repeated claims to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would allow him to use the military against civilians. And it's not an isolated thing. He's said that several times about wanting to use the Insurrection Act. And in fact, commentary from his own staff members have suggested that he was only barely dissuaded from using the military against American civilians. So much so that at a rally in Davenport, Iowa, back in March of 2023, when asked about this, about the idea of using military force on the American people, his response was, "The next time, I'm not waiting." That should be alarming to anyone who is concerned with American democracy, anyone who cares about American democracy. He refers now to his political opponents, members of the media, as the enemy within, and promises what is functionally unconstitutional and extra-legal retribution against those people. It's that kind of statement that has made people like John Kelly. Now, to remind you of who John Kelly is a Marine Corps general. The Marines. A Marine Corps general who also was Donald Trump's chief of staff. And what did he have to say about Donald Trump? He said, and I quote, "Well, looking at the definition of fascism, it's far-right authoritarian, ultranationalist, autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy." So certainly, in my experience, those are the kind of things that he thinks would work better in terms of running America. Certainly the former president is in the far-right area. He's certainly an authoritarian. He admires people who are dictators. He has said that. So he certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, for sure, end quote. That is what a highly decorated, rigidly conservative Marine general who was Trump's chief of staff had to say about him. And I understand. People can bear grudges, right? He and Trump did not settle out on the best of terms. And so, if he is the only person out there who's saying this, then that would make sense, right? That maybe this is just a personal beef and a grief between John Kelly and Donald Trump. Except U.S. Army General Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and therefore the highest military officer in the United States, who served during the Trump administration, referred to Trump as being fascist to the core and the most dangerous person to this country. Okay, so that's two guys. One Army general, one Marine general, both generals, both incredibly high-ranking military folks who basically say Trump's a fascist and a massive threat. Okay, what about somebody who's in defense, but maybe not just a general, right? Okay, well, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, who again worked during the Trump administration, what does he say? He says Trump is unfit for office, a national security threat, and a threat to democracy. All right, well, that's three of them. Is there anybody else on this bandwagon who seems to think that, from a security and defense standpoint, from a standpoint of our soldiers and the officers who have risen to the highest ranks of our military, is there anybody else who's there? Yeah, actually, it turns out Marine Corps General James Mattis, who's also the former Secretary of Defense, said that Trump is a threat to the Constitution after January 6th, and reportedly also has referred to Trump as a threat to the United States as a whole. Okay, so we got a bunch of generals. Any other conservatives in the security apparatus that, actually, turns out, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, veteran of the Bush administration, what does he say? A mountain of facts demonstrates that Trump is unfit to be president. His first 4 years were bad. His second 4 will be worse. Right? Elizabeth Newman, Trump appointee to the Department of Homeland Security. Does he have authoritarian tendencies? Yes. Is he kind of leaning towards that ultra-nationalist component? Absolutely. That's what she thinks. I mean, take a look at Dick Cheney. Vice President Dick Cheney, who most of the people on the left rank somewhere between Darth Vader and Satan in terms of how they, believe Dick Cheney, right? But what does Dick Cheney have to say about Donald Trump? No, he gave us a pretty clear statement, and I quote, "In our nation's 248-year history, there has never been an individual who was a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump. He tried to steal the last election using lies and violence to keep himself in power after the voters had rejected him. He can never be trusted with power again. As citizens, we each have a duty to put country above partisanship, to defend our Constitution." So not only does Dick Cheney repudiate Donald Trump and confirm everything that we have presented in this video and everything that James Mattis and Mark Milley and John Kelly and John Bolton have said about him, Dick Cheney also adds to the end of that, "That is why I will be casting my vote for President Kamala Harris, for Vice President Kamala Harris." So he's not only willing to buck that, right? He's willing to go the extra step farther and endorse Vice President Harris. Now, I don't know whether or not Dick Cheney at the end of the day is actually going to vote for Kamala Harris. I hope he is. But if we're going to ask ourselves, well, how can we know if these things are true? And this particular list of individuals isn't yet convincing to you. As a conservative, I ask you, look around at the other conservatives, the other national security, pride, Second Amendment, red-blooded American conservatives who refuse to support Trump. I mean, you can start with Mike Pence, right? You can start with Mike Pence, whose conservative credentials are deep enough that many people are, at least on the left, are still really, really mad at him, despite the fact that his integrity may have actually saved the country back on January 6, 2021, in the weeks prior. U.S. Army General H.R. McMaster, National Security Advisor under Trump, he won't support Trump. Ty Cobb, Trump's special counsel, he won't support Trump. Stephanie Grissom, his comm director and White House press secretary, she won't support Trump. Omarosa, right? Anthony Scaramucci, Mark Short, Richard Spector, George W. Bush won't come out and say anything. Alberto Gonzalez, right? Is one of the significant cabinet members previously under the Bush administration. Senator Chuck Hagel, former senator, he was former Secretary of Defense. I mean, John Negroponte, Christine Todd Whitman. Current senators, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, Todd Young. Former senators, Jeff Flake, Rob Portman, Alan Simpson, John Sununu. Former Speaker John Boehner, Liz Cheney, right? Dick's daughter and significant enough person. Not only did she vote to impeach Donald Trump, but she sat on the bipartisan January 6th commission and essentially laid out everything Trump was guilty of for the American people, right? But I mean, like, Tom Coleman, Tom DeLay, Charlie Dent, Will Hurd, Pat Toomey, Paul Ryan, former Speaker Ryan, won't support Donald Trump, right? Michigan's own Fred Upton just came out and said not only is he not going to support Donald Trump, but he's going to endorse Kamala Harris, right? Chris Christie, Larry Hogan, Mark Sanford, walking the Appalachian Trail, Mark Sanford. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Carly Fiorina, Bill Kristol, Meghan McCain, right? Most of the McCain family at this point in time. I mean, Anna Navarro, George Will, conservative columnist George Will, won't support Trump. So, think about what I presented here. Go ahead, look it up yourself, right? I understand you may not necessarily believe me in the things that I've laid out, but if you are concerned about the American economy, there is not a lot of evidence that suggests Donald Trump is going to lead it in such a way that's going to help you. If you look at the policies he has espoused in the past, if you look at the product he's put on the table, if you look at the impact of his Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, it has not benefited working families or the American people. If you look at what he's promising for his next term, it's not going to help. If you were interested in something like competence, right? You just want somebody who can do the job well. Well, take a look at Trump's leadership. Take a look at the way our allies have not embraced him under any circumstances whatsoever. Take a look at the way he actively tried to dismantle things like the Paris Accords, which are vital for our environment, or the NATO alliance, which is proving to be a real issue right now in stopping the violent ambitions of Vladimir Putin. If you're concerned about somebody who is worried about you, who shares your values, does Trump share your values? Rape? Racism? Rampant adultery? Widespread deceit? Are you the kind of person who would hire someone to do work for you and then not pay them because you could get your lawyer to cheat them out of that money and it would be cheaper just to pay the lawyer than to pay your bills? Are those your values? They're not my values. They're not the values I was raised with. They're not the values that I have been led to believe conservative people have. Not about democracy. About the rule of law. When faced with charges about his actions, instead of owning his actions, Donald Trump pressed cases to the Supreme Court saying that he should be immune from prosecution, saying that he should not have to face any kind of consequences for the things he did. And thanks to his hand-picked Supreme Court justices, they gave him some portion of that immunity. We are incredibly fortunate that Joe Biden is not the kind of person who would simply decide to start arresting anyone who opposes him politically because he believes they are in league with, Russian disinformation efforts. because that action is technically not, or at least questionably not, illegal after the results of the Trump v. United States Supreme Court decision. This is an unprecedented time. And the man seeking the White House meets every realistic historical and academic definition of a fascist. He is selfish. And yes, he makes mean tweets and he says weird things. But his willingness to lie, his willingness to actively undermine public confidence in things like our public health response and our system of elections. The desire on the part of Trump and, terrifyingly, his vice presidential running mate, J.D. Vance, to functionally gut the American government. His previous actions that would have removed many of the protections that federal employees have as civil servants and allow him to essentially fire anyone who was not loyal to him personally are and should be disqualifying, right? If you are trying to reshape the American government so that you are above the law, have unchecked power, can use the apparatus of government in terms of both the military and the judiciary to oppress and suppress your political opponents, and you want the ability to effectively fire anyone in government who is not loyal to you, not to the Constitution, not to their duty, to the American people. No, they're not loyal to you. They're out. That should be a 5-alarm warning to any patriotic American that this guy cannot be anywhere near the levers of power in the American government. That's what it should be. But it's not. Because many people believe that everything I have said is not true. That all of the prosecutions, all of the evidence provided, the entire January 6th Commission, all of the active known realities about the COVID pandemic, all of the documented cases, all of the statements from Republican members of his own administration, the 700 plus national security experts who have signed documents against him, the list of Republican notables, not counting the Democrats, the list of Republican national security experts and military generals who have said all of this is true and you should not support him. All of that is for some reason not enough. And I have enough faith in you as Americans, as patriots, to think that that's gotta be because at least some of you don't know what's going on. You haven't been tuned in. You haven't been paying attention. All you see is what looks to be, standard thing. Republican and Democrat yelling at each other, right? And you look back and you're like, well, inflation's up and it wasn't up under Trump, and before COVID I seem to be doing pretty well, and now milk's really expensive, so, I'm going to vote for the guy who made it, or when it was less expensive. That's who's going to get my vote, right? Or maybe you like the way that he was a reality TV star, or he seems like he's tough. Cliff note, he's not tough. But maybe that's what you see, right? You kind of like the way he does his little dances at his rallies or something like that, and he makes you feel good to wave the flag again. Maybe that's what you see. Or maybe you're a single issue person, right? Like it's really all just about abortion for you, right? And that Trump appears to be moving in your direction on abortion, and so you're willing to give him your vote to get progress on that issue because that's really, really important to you. Okay. I think that you can, obviously, make that decision. But I feel like I owe it to you, as a fellow citizen, to make sure you understand exactly what that is, what that decision really is. to know who it is you are giving power to in order to move the meter on abortion a little bit further than it's already been moved. Because if your concern is about life in this country, if your concern is about life overall, every metric I've got as a citizen, as a scientist, says the cost of what Donald Trump will do to this country is so much higher than us continuing to kick around some middle-of-the-road policy on abortion. Again, you can disagree with that. You can decide otherwise. But one of the things that tends to happen when a fascist comes to power is that the people who put him there say, well, I didn't know. And for the sake of my country and my conscience, I wanted to make this video. I hope it makes a difference. I hope it makes you think. I hope it changes your mind. But in the event that it didn't, at least now you'll know. I hope that together we can avoid this very, very dark chapter in American history. Maybe the end of it. And we can, in the next few days, because early in-person voting starts tomorrow in Michigan. It's part of the reason this is timed here. I hope that we can, together, be not less brave about facing down fascism. Be not less brave about making the right choice, about speaking truth to power, about being honest about what's actually going on here, about giving people the space to say, you know what, I'm a conservative and I love my country and I really wanted some of the things that I thought Trump was going to bring, but man, he's not the guy. And if it means that I gotta, deal with 4 more years of a Democrat so I can find some real, honest conservatives who do in fact embody the values that have empowered American conservatives since the time of Lincoln, right? Maybe then 4 years from now we can come back and we can fight over it. We can win. Guess my last thing is this. I know the cost of coming out and putting a Harris sign in your yard or telling your conservative friends that you are going to, vote against Trump can be really high, right? You will lose friends. You might lose business opportunities, right? If you do that. So what I'm telling you right now is you don't have to. No one knows what you do in the voting booth. If you see this man for who he is, but you're unwilling to take down the MAGA sign, don't take it down. But in the privacy, in that secular, sacred space, in the voting booth, do the right thing. If you can't bring yourself to vote for Kamala Harris, write in Mickey Mouse or Ronald Reagan or John McCain or Mitt Romney or your grandpa. But don't give power to someone who has blatantly promised to abuse it. That's all I've got for you. Thank you for your kind attention. If you're with me after an hour and 9 minutes, credit to you. Thanks for being here. I will ask that if you see this, if you get this far, share it, right? I normally don't like doing things like that. I kind of just let stuff I put out into the world have a life of its own. But this could use amplification, right? every single person who does see something like this and who decides to either not vote for Trump or maybe go all the way over and actually vote for Harris with the idea that, she's a Democrat, you can beat next time with a better candidate. Every time that happens, it is invaluable to the future of this country. And if this video or you sharing it can have some small part in making that happen, it is worth your time. Certainly it's been worth mine to research and to put this together. So again, thank you for your kind attention. Thank you for your watching. I really, really hope that in the next couple of months we can close a very dangerous and dark chapter in the book of American history. And I'm really hoping you help me make that happen. Thanks again.
Sun goes down and she walks out the door. It's been a long day. It's been a hard day. In 7 hours she'll be back for more to get the bills paid. She goes a long way. Doesn't matter where she comes from. Does it matter who she loves? Does it matter who she cheers for? Who she prays to up above? Stands all day and waits his turn in line to say a few words, to make his voice heard. He marks his ballot and he speaks his mind. He's got opinions which he believes in. Does it matter who he votes for? Does it matter what he's learned? Does it matter his skin color? Does it matter what he's earned? He's me, he's you, and it's my America too. Things are changing, watch the new sunrise. Some people fear new, but they don't have to. They haven't lost their country, but they have new eyes. We've always been here, they couldn't see clear. Doesn't matter